Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome to the latest episode of our Talk is Cheap podcast from NJ Advanced Media, the Star Ledger, and NJ.com. It is Tuesday afternoon, November the 14th, right now. Daryl Slater here. Andy Vasquez now joining us on this podcast. I think I mentioned this last week. Bob Rookover doing the Eagles now for us. I'm sure Bob will still do some Giants stuff. I'll be doing Giant stuff. We'll have a rotating cast of folks helping on the Giants here down the home stretch of this rough season, to say the least. And so Bob, you can find him over on our Eagles podcast going forward. Since he'll mostly be doing Eagles stuff, and obviously the Jets really interesting. So we're kind of pivoting here and making this for the second half of the season. A New York football podcast as the Giants rebuild and the Jets try to find their way at kind of this weird all-in-ish stage of their own rebuild, obviously, with the possibility of Aaron Rodgers coming back or whatever. So Andy's with me. The Jets obviously lost in Las Vegas on Sunday, and just, I guess, crazy, just typical fashion for their season. Nothing going on offense again. We can get to you all know, you also the Giants disaster in Dallas. We'll get to all that. This is where these two teams are at right now. The Giants a complete disaster. The Jets sort of on the brink of perhaps slipping into that. So Andy, what's going on, man? How's it going?
It just did hear from you, Daryl. Yeah, it's going well, and I don't think they're at complete disaster yet, but it's teetering, and I think a lot of people have lost faith given what they've seen from the offense, given what the schedule looks like going up, and you feel bad about the Giants guys. Just think the Jets haven't scored a touchdown since Brees Hall caught that 50-yard pass against the Giants at the end of the first quarter with 106 left. It's been 166 minutes and 6 seconds since their last touchdown. Not good. And, there's really no sign of it getting better because they've been struggling against defenses that haven't been that good, including the Chargers, who had the worst pass defense in the NFL, and they just can't sustain drives. And meanwhile, they have one of the best defenses in the NFL, and you have this tension there because this is the second straight year where their offense is letting the defense down, and they're squandering a playoff window, and who knows with Aaron Rodgers what's going to happen there. But it's certainly interesting and unpleasant for Jets fans. So I'm sure the Giants fans listening it that way will enjoy that too, and for the Jets fans tuning in for the first time, we'll have lots of good insight about what you really should be worried about and what you shouldn't be worried about, and realistically what is going to happen here down the stretch, because there's a lot to sort through. It's a lot of drama, and a little bit of a mess, as it always kind of is with the Jets, as Jets fans know and admit. And all of those Jets fans who traveled to Vegas could see firsthand with the penalties and everything the Jets do to shoot themselves in the foot. So it's going to be an interesting finish to the season with all these moving parts, and how can they set themselves up for next year with Aaron Rodgers, or are they actually going to bring this guy back this year? There's a lot of moving parts.
Yeah, and I think the tension is the one and hopefully we'll get some Jets folks tuning into this, as we go. But this is the time of year where you start to see some of that tension in the NFL, middle of November. Whether it's a team like the Giants, who had high expectations to start the year and just never really got going for various reasons, from incompetence to injuries, and they've really spiraled into like pretty much disaster mode with some of the things we saw on the sideline with you guys all know, right, all the arguing that was going on the sideline, and obviously the Giants are going to say what they're going to say about it. But and then you had a couple defensive leaders in the locker room, Dexter Lawrence and Xavier McKinney, declining to talk to reporters after a game in which the Giants allowed 640 yards, the second most in the entire history of the franchise. I mean, it's a bad look. Sorry, but a 26-year-old man who just made $60 million wanting to spend extended time with his family on his birthday rather than a shorter amount of time, it's not a legitimate excuse for not being accountable. No one's saying that's the Giants' biggest problem, but sorry, that's just not a legitimate excuse. Actually, I'm not sorry, it's not a legitimate excuse. But whatever, it doesn't make Dexter Lawrence a bad guy, it doesn't make him a bad player, it doesn't make him a bad leader. It just means that in that moment he did not show accountability. And again, no one's saying that that's the biggest problem for the Giants. Obviously the on-field product is a much bigger deal, and it's certainly not Dexter Lawrence's fault that they're a disaster on the field, including on defense. So yeah, I think the tension you see, whether it's a case like the Giants, a team that's been in the toilet all year, or like the Bills, right? Because right now you're seeing it with the Bills, high expectations. They lose last night to the Broncos, and you see Stephon Diggs' brother saying, "Get, he needs to get out of there," or the Jets, right, who have kind of teased people all year with this, will they or won't they get over the hump without Aaron Rodgers with this great defense? What is your sense here? We all saw the tension visibly from what was going on with the Giants. What is your sense and your just your observations of where the tension stuff stands with the Jets right now?
Well, the Jets, we saw it earlier in the year where Aaron Rodgers actually had to tell them to grow up because of these displays from guys like Garrett Wilson and some of the other young guys on the sideline. So I think they've done a better job of kind of tamping it down. Brees Hall also vented some frustration week two after not getting the ball. And I think they've made a conscious effort to kind of reduce the nonsense, but it's still like simmering under the surface. When Sauce Gardner saying the other night that he's not surprised that they're under 500 despite how well the defense has played because they're not playing complementary football. But that's just like true. And
Yeah.
I think what's happening at this point is that they just the frustration that this is happening and again and how they're managing it, and they're not at the point where the season is lost yet because they did just have a 3-game winning streak. They've lost 2 in a row. They're 4-5. It's in some ways it looks like an overreaction, but they also haven't scored a touchdown on a drive of longer than one play since October 1st. Like their last 4 touchdowns, including that one to Brees Hall, have all been. I think I may have mentioned this on that podcast going into the Giants game, but they've all been one play, big plays. Brees Hall 72-yard run in Denver. Um, Brees Hall the run against the catch against the Giants. Brees Hall being gifted a touchdown by the Eagles. Those are their only 3 touchdowns since October 1st. So, and you start to extrapolate that, project it forward. How are they going to beat anybody if they can't be relied upon to score a touchdown without luck? And I think that's where the frustration is setting in. And Zach Wilson has been slightly better than last year, but he's still the worst statistical quarterback in the NFL by any major measure. And you start to factor all these things in. And it's a team that like knows that it shouldn't, turn on each other. It can't have these moments like the Giants are having because we've seen, how it kind of snowballs from there. But it seems like it's only a matter of time until the frustration comes out. And when you're trying to hide it, that's when it really explodes. So I think that's where it gets interesting here. Something's got to give. Like they're going to have to score some points, or the defense is going to have that game that nobody expects where it comes back to earth. And it's hard to blame them because it's just you can't ask an NFL unit to be perfect all the time. We saw the Jets special teams meltdown a few weeks ago, I think in part because they have to be so good for the Jets to win. And I think the same thing eventually is going to happen to the defense. And now you've got a very angry Bills team, Josh Allen, who has been, kind of that all of his struggles have kind of started with the Jets and the way they took away his deep option and kind of created a blueprint for other teams to do it. Um, and if the Bills come here with a different scheme, I could see this being a rough week for the Jets defense, just getting caught off guard, and that's how the season would snowball.
Yeah, and of course the Bills firing Ken Dorsey, who was the guy who replaced Brian Dable. Obviously, they promoted him when Brian Dable left from QB coach. Now he's out he was to OC. Now he's out the door. Joe Brady is in, who's pretty highly regarded young coach who was a former OC in Carolina there under Matt Rule. He got fired there, so they did the same thing. They bumped their quarterback coach up. But yeah, you talk about the struggles that Josh Allen has had. I mean, he didn't play well against the Jets in week 1, and then week 6, the Giants did win that game, but or did lose that game rather. The Bills won at 14-9, so it's not like he played great there. So it's been a kind of a weird, unexpectedly disappointing year for Josh Allen and the Bills. And I think that's you talk about common denominators between these two teams and reasons why they've struggled so much really since for the Jets since 2015, for the Giants since 2016, right? And the exceptions kind of sort of last year for both teams and especially for the Giants. But you've seen a lot of tension, and we talked about tension Obviously, you see that a lot through the years, but also you've seen a lot of just inept offensive play. I mean, and that's where a lot of this has come from with these two teams. You're not winning in the NFL with as bad as these offenses have been right now. And you're talking about like over the totality of this time, right? These teams have had terrible offenses and offensive lines, especially. Right now, the Jets are 30th in PFF, Pro Football Focus's offensive ratings. The Giants are 32nd. You're not winning. I mean, you look at the bottom teams, the bottom four teams. Arizona at 2-8. Now, granted, they're getting Kyler Murray back, so that's sort of a caveat there. Obviously, the Jets at 30 because Arizona's tied with Pittsburgh at 28. Then Carolina at 31, they're 1-8, and then the Giants at 32. So you're not, if you're at the bottom like that in offense, you're just not going to be even respectable in the NFL. So the difference here, of course, is that the Jet defense is the best defense in the league, and the Giant defense is currently 23rd in PFF. And I think that there needs to be some long, hard looks here taken at whether Wink Martindale is actually the answer for this defense, because he's a prominent name. And I said it last week. He clearly thinks highly of himself. Really, we addressed, I didn't even get a chance to address this with Bob, but Wink Martindale basically came out swinging and did not really squash down what Xavier McKinney said in terms of like moving on from it. Like he talked at length about it. Okay, so let's go see your defense produce. And it didn't. They got destroyed in Dallas. So the bigger question for these two teams, I think, as we discuss them broadly here in tandem, how much more of these like brutally inept showings is ownership going to take, right? Like if you're Woody Johnson and you see an offense that just straight up is not producing, it's not like they lost that game 21-20, you know what I mean? Like, and they were in it, they didn't score a touchdown. So
Yep.
what are the consequences here? Like, is there a world where Nathaniel Hackett isn't back as the OC next year?
Well, I actually, funny enough, wrote about this on Tuesday that, for Joe Douglas and Robert Saleh, what is the threshold for them to be on the hot seat, for them to keep their jobs? And I think in a normal year, they'd be in deep, deep, deep trouble. And the X factor here is Aaron Rodgers.
Of course.
Like all of this, every insane decision, and there are so many insane decisions that they've made in building this roster. The most insane to make Zach Wilson your only backup, your only option if something happens to the oldest quarterback in the NFL, which it did 4 plays into the season. It's malpractice. It's indefensible. But if it's what Aaron Rodgers wants, and if it's what is going to keep him happy and here next year for them to have a chance to I guess run it back and do it again and take the same kind of risk with a 40-year-old who's now coming off an Achilles injury, that it's what you have to do. But yeah, and I think that's what it comes down to. I think Nathaniel Hackett's going to get a pass he wouldn't get because they're not going to fire Aaron Rodgers' buddy who he wants his play caller, because even if Aaron Rodgers doesn't like the play call, like we may have seen the other night on video where it sure looked like he was shaking his head after a Hackett
Yeah.
play call, like Rodgers is going to change the play at the line of scrimmage when the call comes into his headset, so he doesn't really care. It's about the tone that's set during the week and the overall game plan for him. So it's just like a different set of rules, in terms of you know if they stuck with Zach Wilson and Aaron Rodgers isn't there, I mean they'd be at risk of getting fired next week, both of them, because they both made that choice. They both were here when that choice was made. But um, you know, if Aaron Rodgers is Zach Wilson's buddy and has said all these things about wanting to develop him and wanting to keep him around after, you kind of starts to make sense why like they haven't pulled the trigger on a quarterback change. That like it's very interesting to hear Robert Saleh talk about how it's not fair to blame it all on Zach, and you really have to know it's all on one player when you pull the trigger on a quarterback change. And then you remember, like this is less than a year ago, he benched him 3 times in the same season.
Yeah,
So,
exactly.
so it's just it's all kind of, if you're trying to figure out the common thread here, it all goes back to the fact that they're the two guys who brought Aaron Rodgers here, Joe Douglas and Robert Saleh. And if they are gone, there's a chance Aaron Rodgers isn't going to want to be here in 2024. And that's not a risk Woody Johnson really is willing to take, I'm sure, and can take because of everything that will come with it. So they're in a unique situation in terms of they just kind of have to get through this year without it being a complete disaster. And even if they have less wins at 6 wins than they had last year at 7,
Blame it
normally
on
that
Zach
would be a
Wilson.
death. Yeah, blame it on Zach Wilson. Move on. You can't you know you know do anything about it. You can't say they didn't make progress because it just all be like, well, if Aaron Rodgers hadn't popped his Achilles week 4, so they had cover there.
Total cover. The
Yeah,
ultimate excuse.
and that's what's interesting. The thing you mentioned about Wink, I don't know if you talked about it last week, but what did you make of that? Because that seemed like an insane escalation to me in a situation that's already like kind of spinning out of control. Like, why the guy apologized? Why not just move on? What did you make of him like making an issue out of that? And what effect do you think that has on his job security going forward? Because it definitely couldn't have made things easier on Brian Dable.
No, I mean, look, so Xavier McKinney said what he said. He didn't call Wink Martindale by name, but he did openly criticize him essentially after the Raider loss, basically saying the players leaders weren't being listened to. Okay, and then on Tuesday at his charity event, Xavier McKinney, he didn't apologize. He didn't. He basically
Okay.
said they hatched it out and we're good, but he didn't. And then he answered 2 questions on it and said, "I just want to move on from it." Okay, that's what you'd expect. Then Wink Martindale on Thursday, so 2 days later, after what McKinney said, he had said, I talked to him about it. We're going to leave it at that. But then he didn't leave it at that. He kept being asked more questions about it. Of course, we're going to ask more questions. I mean, I'm never going to criticize someone for being honest, for talking when that's what he wanted to say. That's what he wanted to say. We want people to be honest. Like that's what we're trying to do. People say we're trying to get things out of people. It's not really, you're trying to get honesty out of people, right? That's the job. You want
Yep.
people to be honest. Like you don't.
What's really happening? Yep. What's really happening here? That's what
What
we're
is
trying to
actually
tell.
happening? That's the
Yep.
whole thing. And so if that's what he's really feeling, certainly now was from a broader sense, like if you put yourself in the Giant shoes, is it the smartest decision for him to say every single thing or almost everything that's on his mind about a incendiary situation? Like, no, it's not. It's not. It comes off as obviously he was defensive and he said he was hurt. Okay, that's great. That's all valid. I'm not trying to invalidate what he's saying, and I am. It makes for great content and everything, but it certainly didn't do anything to put the story to bed. And of course, we're all going to go write it. And that's the funny thing that he said. He was like, we talked to these guys about. And I should have like kind of called it out in the moment, but like, or at least when I was writing what I was writing. But he's like, we talked to these guys about not giving these quotes to you all because it was the craziest thing to say. Like they're taking money out of our pockets, like he's saying, like the teams, and putting it in yours, like the media. It's like, okay, well, I didn't really. Story does great clicks. I'm not getting an immediate raise. That's not how it works. But what he's saying essentially is like, yeah, of course, like it's good for media business um, when you have stories that people are interested in. Obviously, I don't really necessarily see the correlation how it takes money out of their pockets. Does it lead to losing and maybe making less money in the future? I guess maybe. But he's saying all this while he's continuing to double down on the situation, and we're all going to go out and write stories about it immediately that people are going to click on.
Yeah, he's doing the same. He's doing the same. That was a fascinating quote that I've never seen it put that way, and I almost don't understand it because I mean the
It's true.
reason the NFL media exists with these teams is because it's mutually beneficial. I mean the fact that we provide this coverage does generate interest, whether the players, teams, or NFL. I mean, the NFL admits it. That's why we still have access in the locker room. But whether the teams want to acknowledge it and the players, like it does help. It does
I
help them.
think
So
that
yeah,
they
that
they
was
just want
interesting.
to just have any like kind of
Control.
strong or enemies that they can create
Yeah.
this sort of cohesion within them and an us against they do this all the time. It's like a military brainwashing type thing where like they're trying to convince these guys that everyone's against you, and it's nonsense. It's like
Yeah.
obviously we're not against them. We don't we're not sitting here at night at home laying in bed or put my kid to bed thinking about ways to screw the Giants. It's literally not how it works. I don't, it doesn't have any impact on my life. Okay. Like,
Yeah.
um, but yeah, no, I thought that was thought, and I guess, um, I should have brought that up in the moment that he was doing was basically he was escalating a situation and honestly like okay he basically put it out there he lauded his own reputation about how he's this great leader um with his defense and like okay that's fine but like people you're being paid to produce results you're one of the most prominent defensive coordinators in the NFL. You have this reputation. You haven't lived up to it. Now, granted, their offense being a disaster is a problem for the defense because the defense was on the field for 15 more minutes than the offense in that game. But they've gotten torched way too often and been the first half in Vegas, Aiden O'Connell ripping them apart for 24 points and 240 yards. Is Wink Martindale the biggest issue with this team right now? No, but he's an issue, and he's like the performance of the defense is an issue, an inconsistent defense that's only played well in flashes. And so he's got, to me, like this target on his back now because he, but fine, if he wants to embrace it, fine. But that's the reality of it. He definitely didn't squash the story. That's for sure.
Yeah, it's interesting to see, the different, bugaboos that fan bases have, and obviously the Giants fans have their frustration about just kind of the way, the inconsistency. And then you go back to the Jets, and I was talking about how, Robert Saleh and Joe Douglas are safe going into this year, but what the problem is that like now the margin for error next year is nothing because of at least Giants fans have, almost every Giants fan alive who's of drinking age has a really strong memory of them winning a Super Bowl or multiple Super Bowls, while the Jets have, every Jets fan alive of drinking age has a strong memory of Mark Sanchez running into the center's ass and fumbling the ball during a meltdown on Thanksgiving. And that's the crowning achievement of this Jets franchise, unfortunately, since 2010. So the frustration that the fan base has is so high, and it's just like, if it isn't what they think it's going to be at the start of next year, it was kind of going to be like this year too with Rodgers. I think he was going to have to deliver to avoid kind of the wrath of this fan base. But if it wasn't that, it was going to be a problem, and that's what is concerning. If I was Robert Saleh and Joe Douglas for next year, is like they have no option because the window is going to be running out where you're going to have to pay guys like Garrett Wilson and Sauce Gardner. They're going to be going into their fourth year of their contract the next year. And you have this frustration. I mean, the Jets offensive rankings since 2015, when they had a pretty good year with Fitzpatrick and they were ranked 10th in overall offense. Since then, it's 2016, they were 26th, 2017, 28th, 2018, 29th, 2019, 32nd, again, last place in 2020, 26th and 25th in 2021 and 22, and now they're 30th, like you said. So it's not just that they're bad this year. It's that like they've been this bad for 8 years. I mean, they have not had a competent offense in 8 years, and you throw that on the longest playoff drought in franchise history and the longest active drought in the NFL. For a team that, a franchise, a fan base that already had all of these reasons to be like upset for the way things have gone since 1960, since January of 1969. It's a powder keg. So yeah, I think Robert Saleh has already miscalculated, and Joe Douglas, they miscalculated last year, like how the fans respond to them kind of, plummeting off the radar at the end of the season. And I think they've misguided or they've misjudged again, like how forgiving fans would be after losing Aaron Rodgers. And at a certain point, it's going to come back to bite them because, it's going to affect the bottom line in terms of, the ticket sales and stuff like that. I mean, I'm sure they'll do fine again with season tickets for next year, but in terms of the extra, selling out every game, you can already see, like Monday night against the Chargers, it wasn't a complete sellout. And for a team that was at that point in the driver's seat in the AFC East, before losing 2 straight games to under 500 teams, it's a delicate balance. So it is really interesting to see how it's all going to play out. And it's so much, like, I'm sure Giants fans can see it, looking across the way. There's just so much angst and frustration and anger among this fan base, and rightfully so, that it adds another element of desperation to the whole thing.
And if Jet fans are being honest with themselves, they're recognizing what you were saying earlier, which is Aaron Rodgers is the one who holds all the cards here. And so if Aaron Rodgers wants Nathaniel Hackett back, he's back. If Aaron Rodgers wants his coaching staff back, they're back. I mean, I think the only variable is right? Yeah, Zach Wilson's probably gone, right?
You would think,
Right.
but
But
who knows at this
they're
point?
not going to run it back with him as the backup quarterback, I wouldn't think. But yeah, so that creates this incredibly high standard for if you're basically like letting this guy completely run your franchise essentially. Well, okay, well, you better win a lot of games. You better
Yep.
deep in the playoffs to make this whole charade worth it, and to not have us people not look back at it as a charade, because if they don't win, then that's what everyone will look at it as. Like it was worth a shot, I guess, but it was just a typical Woody Johnson led Jets failure is how it'll be looked back on. And bad injury luck, of course, but could Woody Johnson have foreseen that? No, but I think so. Obviously, there is certainly future considerations for the Jets as they look ahead to their next season, but there's also obviously an eye on the rest of this season. I mean, you look at what the Jets have ahead at 4-5. They get let's see.
Yeah, they got the Bills this weekend. Then
This is
they
what I
play
get for
the
checking Wikipedia.
Dolphins. Yeah,
Wikipedia has already put the Jets winning 31-0. I was just checking the schedule.
against the Bills.
I
Yeah,
know.
they two key games here in a
Huge.
5-day stretch.
And the Texans aren't bad either. By the way, that game's getting flexed to Monday, the December 11th. So have fun with that.
Oh, I did not know that.
I'm guessing it will because the current game there is Giants Packers.
Oh,
So the Giants
at
are
least it's
such
a home game.
that the only game they can move is Texans Jets. And so maybe with CJ Stroud playing well, they might move it. But
Well, and Rodgers potentially coming back, although we can get into that if you want.
yeah, who knows? I
But
mean,
yeah,
he basically said mid-December is what he's targeting, and then we'll
yeah,
see.
and he said Pat McAfee. Actually, while we're recording this podcast, he said something like his plan is to be back with the team apparently every day around Thanksgiving. So I'll just short version. I will believe it when I see it that the Jets are going to put a 40-year-old. He turns 40 on December 2nd. A 40-year-old man is going to make the quickest recovery from Achilles surgery, and they're going to actually risk because if he pops it again or suffers a setback, it's over. His career is probably over. All of the investment the Jets made in him is over, and this team is very well. If they lose the next two games, they're going to be out of the playoff race. So I will believe it when I see it. Yeah,
they'll be 4-7. So the Dolphin game being on Black Friday right after Thanksgiving, it'll be a little bit still till mid-December, and at that point, a 4-7 with Falcons at home, Texans at home coming up. Then
and every team in the AFC with at least 5 or 6 wins, except for the Patriots at this point. I mean, yeah, I don't even think if they win those games, I will believe it when I see it. That is my from things I've heard and from my personal belief. I will believe it when I see it. I cannot imagine it happening even for the Jets, but we will see.
It might be a moot point if they're out of contention.
Yeah,
then they're just gonna, there won't even be maybe he'll just come to his senses, even if he's physically ready, and that's an if at this point. And so, yes, obviously the season is still some meat on the bone here for the Jets to kind of claw back into the conversation. I think it's a small if they win next week and maybe or Miami or certainly both would be crazy, but and to be in the conversation entering December, I think that's a small victory for this Jet team. Say they go and get into December and they're 5-6. I mean, that's good. I understand everyone will be pissed about the offense, but that's, I think, a small victory for this team to be even in the conversation, given the state of their quarterback thing. So it's not like they were waving fans are giving up on the season and just saying, let's look ahead to next year, even though there is some of that look ahead to next year, because you can't help it because there's the Rodgers carrot out there.
Yeah, and the frustration of this offense. I mean, it's hard I understand why fans are that way, but yeah, I think it is, and that goes back to Robert Saleh, a good coach, which is the question you're asking in year 3, and a lot of people are going to say they're completely out on him, and some people are too far in on him. I think he has shown potential to be a good coach because he's figured out how to motivate his players. He's figured out how to get them to believe they can beat anyone. He has not figured out the details, and there's just countless examples of it just from the other night in terms of the way he managed the clock at the end of the game. Not all of his fault. Not all his fault because he was chasing after the official, but the fact that he's not on the correct side of the official, he shouldn't be watching what's happening. That's his only job at that point is to get the timeout. So again,
call plays on offense or defense.
Yeah. So again, I'm not the official could have and should have heard him, and they should have, because he was calling timeout the second it ended. But the fact that he wasn't in the right position, I'll give him a little bit of a pass. But the thing where Garrett Wilson was looked at for like 5 minutes on the sideline, he threw like started playing catch with Tim Boyle, the backup. He was standing 10 feet from him. He bounced the ball halfway to him, and then they kept playing catch. Somebody else, was completing the passes for Garrett Wilson. 30 minutes later, the Jets call a trick play that asks Garrett Wilson to pass the ball. I mean, how does that happen? Like stuff like that. The penalty situations. He has not figured out the details. He has not benched players who need to be benched until it's too late. That stuff he has not figured out. So I think like the book isn't out on him all the way as a head coach yet. And if the Jets end up getting rid of him next year, I think he'll probably get another shot. But it's really interesting. It's a really interesting conversation. But the fact that he's got them in this situation with as bad as their offense has been, and that the locker room hasn't, torn itself apart. Now this is the second straight year where the exact same thing is happening. I think, there is something to be said for that in terms of, it is a victory, and victory isn't the right word, but it's not nothing. And for everything to go as wrong as it did on the fourth play of the season, for them still to be in the hunt here, it's not nothing. But yeah, they have to figure out a way. And I think like that's the thing. This is the hope that Jets fans should have, is like they don't have to be a good offense. They have to be like just not like a bottom three offense in the NFL. They have to score like maybe a touchdown a game, maybe average like 19 points a game, because they keep losing games where they're giving up like less than 20 points. That's the problem. They can't lose those games. They have to figure out a way just to move the ball, just to get in the end zone once a game. And if they can do that, they can go on a run here, even though their schedule is not easy.
And on the other side of it, the Giants what a catastrophe season on so many levels. The injuries, now the implosion stuff and they can downplay it all they want, but the optics at least of an implosion, and the incompetence, certainly. And again, I get the injuries are a big part of it. Obviously, you're not going to win in the second half of your season if you're having to start the third string quarterback the whole way. You're just not going to win pretty much at all. And the task here for Brian Daboll in year 2 is to keep this locker room together. That's it. And to not lose every game by 1,000,000 points, so, and to field a competent defense, just because you're down to, quarterback hell doesn't mean your defense has to give up 640 yards, which is what happened the other day in Dallas. And so do I think we talking about these two coaches, right? Like, what do you make of Daboll, or what does one make, or the Royal U, I guess, make of Daboll? He's 4-12-1 in his last 17 games in the regular season in which they played starters, not counting week 18 last year. That's a full regular season worth going back to last year of mostly losing. And now, a lot of it, some of it stems from quarterback attrition this year. But remember, they got destroyed in 3 games that Daniel Jones started and finished. Seattle this year, San Francisco this year, Dallas, the first Dallas game this year. And they were getting spanked by 18 and wound up losing by 15 in Miami. Spanked when he got hurt and hurt his neck, and went on to lose by 15. So early in the fourth quarter, he got hurt. So, I think John Mara will not have the stomach to do another 2 and done here after Ben McAdoo, Pat Shurmur, Joe Judge, for a couple of reasons. I think, maybe 3, right? So like the quarterback attrition here is more prolonged and pronounced than what Joe Judge dealt with late in his second season, number 1. Number 2, Brian Daboll won last year. He won a playoff game. I think he'll get the benefit of the doubt there. And number 3, they are going to be drafting a quarterback high next year. Right? So if you think this guy is a quarterback molder, who molded Josh Allen, right, from a guy who was considered to be a raw project player to a very successful player. And now you see, like, this year, he played, last year without Brian Daboll, but Josh Allen tailing off a little bit this year. So you wonder, like, how much did Brian Daboll have to do with his success? If you do think he's that type of guy, and I'm sure they do, then let him mold whoever you bring in here as a high draft pick quarterback. And so, I think that's where it's going to go, in barring a Joe Judge like press conference meltdown from Brian Daboll. It's hard for me to envision him doing anything other than grunting his way through these post game press conferences. And you know what? Reporters get annoyed with that, but that is not making the headlines like Joe Judge made with his Gettysburg Address on acid thing that he basically gave at the end of that year.
That was a lot. That was a lot longer than the Gettysburg Address.
Yeah, it was
Like
right.
a lot longer. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. And like you just can't embarrass yourself like that. And so right, there have been these touches of embarrassing moments. The season's been an embarrassment. The implosions on the sideline the other day, fiery moments, were not good looks. You can't have much. You can't have more of that. And that's why I think we need to hear from John Mara. Like where is he here? He kind of smugly blew off reporters at the owners meetings and the fall owners meeting. Okay, like your team's a disaster. Like show up and answer some questions. It's your team, So, I think that's quit hiding. Let's hear from you. I wrote from it today. Wrote about it today. So, obviously the draft. I mean, we've talked here now for almost 35 minutes, and we can kind of wind down here before we do our pick with just draft stuff. At this time of year, just what week and a half before Thanksgiving. Normally, in the past we've both been doing like, oh, mock draft for Giants, mock draft for Jets. At this point, like I don't think our Jet fans are not yet in Tankathon land yet. We're Tankathon being Tankathon.com, great website.
Summer teetering. Yeah. It's like
Okay.
we got the life support tweets. We've got the
Yeah.
season on life support tweets.
Okay. All right. So the Giants
But there's also the hope. Like if the Jets win this weekend and Miami loses, or I can't remember exactly what it is, but they could theoretically be playing for the division lead still next week somehow.
yeah.
I don't know how it's possible, but it is possible.
Meanwhile, the Giants, of course, haven't lost 7 of 8. Their fans are, the Tankathon's the homepage right now,
Yeah.
And so, and really on Sunday, as the Giants were getting just completely blasted by the Cowboys, the Cardinals were beating the Falcons, which means Cardinals are now 2-8. And so the draft order looks like this: the Bears at number 1 because they have Carolina's pick, and Carolina's 1-8. The Giants are sitting there at number 2 right now at 2-8 because they win the strength of schedule tiebreaker over, and it's strength of schedule. It's not head to head. Head to head stuff only comes in if teams have the exact same strength of schedule. The first tiebreaker is always strength of schedule. So whether it's a 2-way tie, a 3-way tie. So the Giants at 2-8 at number 2. At number 3 are the Pats at 2-8, and of course that they got a game coming up. The two of these two teams. Not this week, obviously. Giants and Washington the following week. Pats at Giants, and then the Cardinals at number 4. They're 2-8. And then you got the Bears at 5 at 3-7. But so like the Bears could definitely take a quarterback. The Patriots no doubt could take a quarterback. Would the Cardinals, I think, are probably going to play their way down in the draft order because Kyler Murray's back, which is big for those teams at the top of the draft. The question for the Giants is, will they wind up with their first choice at quarterback at number 1 or their second or their third? So you're talking maybe Caleb Williams, Drake May, is Michael Penix, is he worth and that's how we're going to pronounce his last name for now, right? I think that's to avoid slip ups.
We're not going to do what Desmond Howard did a few weeks ago.
Yeah, and
we'll leave it at that.
Is he worth a number 3 pick? So, or do you just take Marvin Harrison there and trade up into the bottom of round 1 with your extra second round pick as ammo and take a quarterback there if he falls? So I know, neither of us have spent a lot of time studying film of these quarterbacks, but I don't know, man. Like the quarterback hit rate, you never know, right? Like where Patrick Mahomes was drafted and Josh Allen was drafted, Lamar Jackson was drafted, just goes to show you don't always have to get like the first guy.
Yeah, or we're Tom Brady. Obviously an extreme example, the most extreme example, but yes. Yeah, you don't, and it's sometimes like I think trade or like picking at the top of the draft is a little bit, if you're in a position to pick at the top of the draft and you can trade down and get a guy 5 to 10, not only are you helping yourself out by getting yourself an extra asset, but you're helping that guy out because the amount of pressure on a Zach Wilson, even compared to Daniel Jones, like, yes, Daniel Jones picked very high, but he wasn't he wasn't the number 2 overall pick in the draft. He wasn't picked over every other quarterback but Trevor Lawrence. There isn't this like immediate, you can bring him along a little bit more slowly. I mean, I think when you're picked so high, when you're one of those top 2-3 picks, it's a different ball game for any player, but especially a quarterback. So, and then the Jets, the big issue for them looking forward is they're going to have to draft a quarterback soon. They really have to draft a quarterback this year. And then you're walking that line with Aaron Rodgers. If you really can't draft a quarterback in the first round, because is that gonna? I mean, you really need to if it's what's best for the franchise. But will they? I don't know, because they don't want to do the same thing the Packers did and piss off Aaron Rodgers, and then so
They're
Joe
gonna
Douglas's record drafting quarterbacks has been bad. Is he gonna? You could trust him to? Do you even trust him to find ones? It's a tough spot for the Jets right now
they're gonna let
in that
Rodgers.
regard.
Are they gonna let Rodgers in the war room?
Yeah, I mean, he's got a headset on the sideline, and by the way, there's a limited amount of headsets on the sideline, so they had to take one away from somebody else. I haven't been able to review the tape to figure out exactly who it is, but it's interesting. I mean, gosh, the whole thing is. It's still hard to believe that any of this has happened, including the Jets getting Aaron Rodgers. But the way it's panned out, it seemed like has any of this really happened? It's just he's just standing on the sideline watching games for the Jets and walking now at a brisk pace 2.5 months or less than 2.5 months after Achilles tear, and we're talking about him coming back in December. I mean, it's the Jets, so this is
I
what
mean,
you expect,
you
I
talk
guess.
about just 2 seasons here with the Jets and Giants where so many things were just been unforeseeable. Like who could have ever foreseen this or that? Or we could go down the list of who could have ever foreseen ... and Tommy DeVito certainly being one of them. And so, but these teams, obviously part of the NFL is dealing with the reality of the situation. And for the Giants, it's sort of like, Tyrod Taylor could come back, I guess, maybe from his ribs injury, but a lot of Giants fans are saying, no, we want to get the top pick or the second pick. And on the flip side of the whole conversation about you could get a guy at the Allen range and the Mahomes range and Lamar Jackson range, and he could be really, really good, is what happened with the Jets in 2020. So the Jaguars started 2020 1-0. They lost every game the rest of the way. They won 1-15. The Jets, as Jet fans will remember, started 0-13 in the final year, right? The final year of Adam Gase.
Mm-hmm.
Then they pulled off one of the biggest upsets in the history of the NFL, and they beat the Rams in LA. And this is the COVID year, so there were no
Can I just
fans.
pop in? Can I just pop in here just real quick, Daryl?
Yeah. I think
I
they were
want people
17
to
and a half point
understand.
dogs.
Yeah, I just want people to understand. The Jets, 2 games before that, had lost on a Hail Mary to the Raiders where they
Yes,
zero blitz,
the zero
and
blitz.
Greg Williams got fired, even though the Jets clearly didn't want to fire anybody during the season. He gets fired. They go to Seattle. Now this was supposed to, when the schedule was created, the idea was they'd go to Seattle, stay out west, and then go to LA. But because of COVID, they fly to Seattle. They get housed by 35 points. They
37,
fly back to 37. Okay, thank you. They fly back to Jersey,
40-3.
and then they fly back to LA to face a Rams team where they may have been 20-point dogs. It
I
may have
think it
been
was
worse.
17 and a half. I think
It
it
was it
tied for
was
the biggest
it was
upset win in the
it
history of
was
the NFL.
huge. Yeah, it was a huge. And then it was the only time I've ever picked the Jets to lose by more than 20. And then they won, and they won because a punter made a tackle. I mean, you just can't. And then the punter, of course, because it's the Jets, Braden Mann ended up being a disaster who cost them games last year, but they were trying to win with a bad punt against the Patriots. So I mean, you cannot make this stuff up for the Jets. Sorry,
Then
I
they
just
went and
had to
then they
interject
went and
there.
they beat the Browns the next week.
The Browns had no wide receivers because of COVID. They
So they
literally
were.
did not have any wide receivers on the roster. It was unbelievable.
So
It
I
didn't
don't know.
end up affecting their draft position, that win. It was the I firmly believe if they had lost the game to the Rams, they would have lost out. It
So
would have been over,
So
but they
I
didn't.
guess, did you recall what the strength of schedule tiebreaker would like once if they finished 1-15 and the Jags had finished 1-15, would the Jags still have gotten the number one pick?
I think I think it was like close, but I think the Jags. I think it leaned towards the Jags. I think their
Either
schedule
way,
was really hard that year. Yeah,
I mean, either
so
way,
they're
the Jets obviously outright had the number two pick. There was no tiebreaker involved, so that goes
yeah.
to and of
They
course,
would have they would have gone 0-16 if they lost. It was the last year of the 16 game schedule. They would have gone 0-16. I firmly believe it if they had lost that game in LA. But they did not.
and
And that
and
was kind of the end for Goff too in LA. I think that's when they were like, yeah, we've had enough.
and then of course there could. I mean, look, does Trevor Lawrence look like a future Hall of Famer? Not necessarily, right? But
Not right
uh,
now, yeah.
the gap. So like right, like just looking at his
He's
numbers
had a
last.
rough year
He
after
had a
being pretty
95
good.
quarterback rating last year. He's at 89 this year, so he looked like he was on his way to being a great player last year. But he's not quite there yet. But the gap between, I mean, maybe he'll go down as a bust, quite frankly, because the standard for a number one pick is so high. but the gap between him and Zach Wilson is just enormous. So,
If the Jets had Trevor Lawrence right now, the Jets would be like a legit contender because, like we said, they don't need to be a good offense. They need to be like they need to be able to possess the ball and score a touchdown once, at least once every 2 weeks.
that would help. Yeah, I think that once every 2 weeks is not too much to ask.
Yeah.
And so yeah. Anyway, so just a trip down memory lane there as we look ahead to the rest of this Giant season. And yes, whether you pick one or two can matter depending on how the quarterback class winds up looking. And it's a very inexact science. Not just it's just it is. I mean, we're assessing these quarterbacks. So
Jalen Hurts, where he was picked what, first pick of the second round or something, last pick of the first round.
I
So,
know he was lower. He was I looked it up earlier this year or recently. He was 53rd. So
no, there you go. My
um
goodness.
yeah, so yeah, there you go. So and the Hurts situation is why, even if Daniel Jones played out the year in average fashion, why Joe Judge very well could still have drafted a quarterback next year. Joe Shane, because it's a position where it pays to be bold. And the
Yes.
downside to missing on a quarterback in the second round when you already have Daniel Jones on your roster is not as significant as the potential upside to hitting on that player. And so that's what they did. They drafted Jalen Hurts when Carson went, oh, why'd you got Carson Wentz? Well, Carson Wentz turned out not very good as a teammate or a player. Yeah. So, and of course, the Jets rebuffed Carson Wentz, who wanted to come join them. Maybe too much ego juice there with Wentz and Rodgers in the room at the same time.
I won't. Yeah, I'm not gonna. I'll rip the Jets for not making a trade for a guy like Josh Dobbs when that's all they need to win right now. But I'm not gonna rip them for not going after Wentz, who seems like a handful
Yeah, to say the
and
least.
hasn't. It doesn't. It's not like he's been playing, a lot better than Zach Wilson has played this year in the last couple of years either. I know it's a very low bar, but
So we will wrap it up here with talking about, and we don't, obviously there's no need to uh, break down too many of the X's and O's for this Giants Commanders game, but I'll just give a pick here. The Giants are going to lose. They're right now 9.5-point dogs in Washington against the Commanders, or in the beautiful city of Landover, Maryland, I should say, against the
where are
Commanders.
you eating before you give the pick? Importantly, where is Daryl Slater getting a meal in the greater
Right.
Washington, D.C.? If you're willing to reveal this information, I don't
How
want to put
about
you on the spot. I'm sorry.
I will be
What,
eating I'll be taking the train down Saturday night after my child's fourth birthday party on Saturday, and late train Saturday nights with not a far train ride from Central Jersey-ish um to New Carrollton, right near the stadium, and I'm going right to the courtyard, going to sleep, getting up, eating a courtyard Marriott breakfast, eating the very depressing media food at the worst stadium in the NFL. Then I think I may get to treat myself after the game to a delicious Wegmans sandwich
oh,
before an
actually,
eight.
not a bad choice.
Yeah, so it's going to be a little bit of a time crunch. Can I get from, I don't feel like bringing my bag with me to the game. Maybe I'll have no choice. I'll bring the bag to the game, go from game to Wegmans to train to home to the bed.
It's always right up the train too. Like leave the game a little early after, finish the stuff for the morning on the train. So you got
Sure.
options.
Yeah, rolling the dice with the Amtrak Wi-Fi though. And so yeah, I think the Giants are going to lose this game. I think their defense plays better because Sam Howell's not a very good quarterback. I think the Giants will lose, I don't know, let's just say 21-17, just for argument's sake. It'll be respectable. Their offense scored 17 last week against Cowboys. But yeah, what about, and feel free to get into more of the nuts and bolts for Jets Bills. What
Yeah.
what are your Jets Bills thoughts, and where will you be getting your Buffalo wings?
Yeah, I'll start with the wings. We'll break that down quickly. All good options are obviously Anchor Bar is the stand, the long time standalone kind of big time option if you're thinking about Buffalo wings. But I also like Gabriel's Gate. I also like Duff's a lot. And Bar Bill is a
Yeah.
new place on my radar that I'm really high on. So I think the Jets beat those of us. We're a pretty tight knit crew, and a lot of times we'll have like a meal together. So I think we'll probably be spotted at one or perhaps two of those places in a short trip to Buffalo. I think most of us fly in early afternoon. uh, Saturday and are out very early on Monday morning. But yeah, I mean, you can't go wrong with any of those choices. But I gotta say, I'm looking forward to Bar Bill. That place is newly on my radar, and it's very the wings and the beef on weck is for real. So if
Oof,
any
yeah.
yeah any Jets fans or Giants fans are making that trip, it's close to the stadium too. So for a 425 game, a good pregame option. With the actual game, it's interesting because I think it's not going to get any easier for Josh Allen. I think with Brady, it's an X factor, and I think it helps the Bills. But also, like they played a game on Monday night. It's a short week. How much are they really going to be able to change before a Sunday game? And I think if they try to change too much, they're going to run into trouble. Just I've realized in my 8th year on this beat, you have to embrace the insanity, and nothing would be more insane than the Jets beating the Bills the way things have gone to knock the Bills below 500. It just feels like it's going to happen. I think the way the Jets match up with them, the way that Sauce Gardner and DJ Reed don't even have to travel to take away Diggs and to really limit what Gabe Davis can do, and that just makes it really hard for Josh Allen to operate. You're asking him to make those touch throws that those mid range throws that just aren't his strength and haven't been his strength since his rookie year. And for all the improvements that he's made, the biggest thing I think Brian Dable did with him is eliminate those kind of touch throws, those mid range throws from like him having to rely on those to succeed. So I just feel like the Jets are going to somehow win this game, and somehow I don't know why. Um, they're so due for a touchdown that they're going to score one at some point, or maybe it'll be another one play wonder with Brees Hall. Maybe with Garrett Wilson. That's kind of more my feeling here. I think they'll have something. They'll draw something up that'll get Garrett Wilson open. They'll score a touchdown early, and they'll get a 17-13 win and just throw the AFC East into complete disarray because that's what the Jets do.
Sure, why not? Right, that's the motto of
Yep.
this season. Sure, why not? The whole season is just Jets season is just the NFL season version of the shrugging hands guy emoji. All right, well,
Yeah.
yeah, I guess,
Yep.
right.
Yeah.
And just like you said,
Always going to be this way.
roll with the insanity. All right, thanks everybody for joining us, Jets and Giant fans alike. Be sure to Jet fans, let everybody know that we're doing this kind of as a Jet Giant thing for the rest of the season. New York football podcast, if you will, Northern New Jersey football podcast, since that's where these teams play, obviously. And be sure to check NJ.com/Jets for all of Andy's coverage, and NJ.com/Giants for all of our Giants coverage. And be sure to, of course, subscribe, like, rate, review all your favorite podcasting platforms, et cetera, et cetera. So thanks everybody for listening. Enjoy the rest of your week. Hang in there. Weird, kind of strange, adversity filled times for these teams, but you guys are used to it. This has been this has been the reality for a few years now. So everyone have a great week. Enjoy the games if you happen to be going to the Bill Stadium, which is honestly an awesome old NFL stadium, or Washington Stadium, which is the ninth circle of hell. Okay, thanks everybody for joining us, and we will talk to you soon.